Qualitative data is represented as categories or labels, which don't have any mathematical meaning. It is possible in some circumstances that qualitative data could be represented as numbers, but they would simply be used as names, and their values would have no meaning. Quantitative data, on the other hand, involves numbers only, and the numbers have mathematical meaning. We'll look at a few examples of types of data, and we want to decide a few things about it. Is it qualitative or quantitative? And is it discrete or continuous? For each type, give an example. I'll let you try them first, and then I'll give my responses. Okay, if we're asked to give the color of a shirt, one possibility could be the color label blue. And in that case, these types of responses would be discrete. Meaning there would be different categories of color. Let's say blue, red, and green. However, it's worth noting that in science, color is defined by the wavelength or frequency of light. And those can actually take on any real values. So that's just something to be aware of. We could treat color as if it was discrete categories and give them labels and names. Or we could look at a whole spectrum of color. Here's an image of the visible color spectrum and the associated wavelengths in nanometers as well. It's actually a continuous variable. So, color can be defined by categories. And nominal labels, if we wish. But it is a continuous quantity. And so also we should mention that blue is an example of a qualitative description of color. Blue is an example of a qualitative description of color. But if we were to give a wavelength as a number, then that would be quantitative. Let's look up the wavelength for blue light. According to this chart, blue has a wavelength of between 450 and 485 nanometers. That would be a quantitative description of the color. So I hope this example makes it clear that the way we choose to describe quantities can vary, and that's something we have to keep in mind. Now let's look at a number of texts sent in a month. I'll give an example of, say, 42 texts. Since only whole numbers are allowed here, This would be a discrete type of variable, and it's not one where we can get more precise with our measurements of it, and it's going to be a count. And this is not the kind of thing that can ever be treated as continuous like color could. It's just going to be discrete no matter what. And this will also be quantitative because it involves numbers that have meaning. Now, how do we know that the numbers have meaning? If you were to take the numbers that are on athletic jerseys, for example, those don't have any mathematical meaning. They're just labels that each player wears. If you were to think of zip codes as well, these are numbers which are assigned to certain areas, but there wouldn't be any mathematical calculations you could make that would have any meaning. Whereas with texts, 0 corresponds to no texts sent. 2 texts would be twice as many as 1. You could add a number of texts to another. You could subtract. These are mathematical operations that would be relevant. So that's why it's quantitative. The weight of a golden retriever, let's say 75 pounds. Is it discrete or continuous, this concept? Well, weight is a physics quantity that could be measured in a lab, and I would call it continuous, because the weight of the dog could really be any number, any real number. You could have fractions, you could have decimals. You can get more and more precise as you measure the dog. It would definitely be quantitative. How about the state of birth? How about a person's state of birth? I'll give New York as an example. This is a label which describes an area or place or a governmental boundary. It is discrete because you were either born in one state or another. And this is definitely going to be an example of qualitative. There's no numbers associated here. How about the ounces of water that you drink per day? Let's say 115 ounces. It is going to be continuous because the volume you drink could be any real number. And also, this is quantitative.